there's lots of different cycles that I follow. You've got the business cycle, which coincides with the halving cycle for Bitcoin, which also coincides for the presidential election cycle. Okay, so they're all 4-year cycles. Yeah, you can look at the business cycle from things like the ISM, etc., and looking at economics and stuff like that. And then you've got the Bitcoin halving cycle. So the supply that can be mined is halved every 4 years. Okay, and then you've got a presidential election which takes place every 4 years. Okay, and what you tend to see is in the halving year, which is the post-election year, you tend to see Bitcoin sort of like accumulating, etc., and then you tend to get the more of an expansion phase along with the stock market in the presidential year, the election year that follows. So the year that follows the election, sorry. And then you've got other cycles such as the 18.6 year real estate cycle, and you've got the 7-year Shemitah cycle. And I'm going to break down a couple of things about those cycles. Okay, so I've done a lot of back testing on these cycles, looking back through history, and on one of my longer videos we will go through it and break it down and look at it on the charts and see the impact and everything. But if you imagine like the 18.6 year cycle, okay, so we're coming to the end of or the mania phase of the current 18.6 year cycle, which started around 2010 after the markets completely bottomed, the housing markets this is, after the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis. Okay, and you can go back before that, 18 years to around 1990, and they're often around recessions. Yeah, housing bubble induced recessions, and housing prices will fall for 4 years. Okay, and then they will start their recovery for 7 years, then mid-cycle slowdown, then for the final 7 years, and then it sort of all resets again. So like you say, you've got 7 plus 7 equals 14, add an extra 4 years of downturn, it gets you your 18 years. And when it says it's the 18.6 year real estate cycle, it's not precisely 18.6 years. It's roughly an average on, because some of those cycles, when you go back, if you look back over the last, like say, 150 years or so, as far back as you can go to analyse that, you will see that some cycles are longer than others and some are shorter than others. And one thing I also wondered is why, a lot of markets can move with things like astrology, okay, how the planets are moving and over time and everything like that. And this goes back to the ancient philosophers and ancient civilizations who studied the stars and all that sort of stuff. So it could be all self-fulfilling prophecies, who knows? I mean, it's like, it's like the moon, the gravity of the moon on the earth, its gravitational pull controls the tides, the weather, and all such things. Okay, and I guess it controls our human emotions as well in some way, and just things that just naturally take place on this planet. I mean, how can you say a housing or a real estate cycle is a natural thing, but maybe big smart money institutions, they all follow this stuff, so then it all becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's a similar thing to the next cycle I want to talk about, which is the Shemitah 7-year cycle. So this is a Hebrew cycle, a Jewish cycle, and this dates back thousands of years. Okay, and the reason it's a 7-year cycle is, if I don't know if you was into religion, you would know about the 7th day being the Sabbath day. Well, they call the 7th year the Sabbath year, and they say on that Sabbath year that farmers should lay their ground to rest and not farm that land for 1 year. Okay, and that went back a long time ago, and that goes on in the markets today with people who believe in this Shemitah cycle, whether you're Jewish people, Hebrew believers, you know, they would follow that and say, well, on the 7th year, I'm going to take my money out of the market, and then come back a year later. So the last time the cycle took place was in 2021, September 2021 to September 2022, and then before that it was September 2014 to September 2015, and before that it was 2007 to 2008, before that it was 2000 to 2001. So you see where I'm going with that. There's some monumental moments in the market history in those years that I mentioned there. 2000 dot-com bubble, 2008 subprime mortgage crisis, 2015 China banking collapse, 2021, you know, you had the post-pandemic recession, and what's the next one going to be? You know, we're expecting that in 2028 to 2029, and I feel like that's an important year as well, because if this was to be the end of the current real estate cycle, okay, then if it was to top, say, end of this year, maybe early next year, then 4 years down from 2026 or 2025 would bring you to 2029, 2030. That coincides with that as well, because Shemitah as well, the market doesn't always bottom at the end of Shemitah or during Shemitah. It quite often falls around 500 days after the Shemitah ends. So that timing kind of works out. And you know, if we had a bear market year like expected coinciding with the Bitcoin halving cycle, the presidential election cycle and the business cycle, that would take you out to another cycle, and that being a bear market year, that's like say that 2029 2030 time. So you would have those maybe multiple cycles there, Shemitah, real estate cycle, business cycle, election cycle, halving cycles, all coming together. And then not only that, we're coming to the end of a long cycle, a 60-year cycle, where this one's been all about technology, computing, and now as we get to the end of that cycle where everything's getting completely extreme in that field, such as AI, you know, crypto, all these sort of things, you can see that playing out as well. And then one final cycle would be the fourth turning. I don't know if you've read that book, and that's written by William Strauss and Neil Howie, and that book talks about the turning of cycles of generations, roughly spanning over 100 to 120 years, and the fourth turning is known as the crisis era. And unfortunately, we are facing a crisis era, and you can look at geopolitics at the moment, and I won't go into that too much here. I don't want to get this video banned or anything, but there's a lot of signs for things that are very unpleasant. And you could also say that, you know, we've already had a number of crises as we entered this final fourth turning, before we go into a new cycle of that. But you know, if you've got to just try and remain positive and realize that sometimes global events don't always impact you in the world. Unfortunately, they might impact others, and all you can do is hope for the best for everyone. But knowing how all of these things can impact the markets can really help your financial future. And let's not focus too much on the doom and gloom of the crisis era of the fourth turning, but let's be aware that we are in a potentially mania phase of a 18.6 year real estate cycle. And you know, we've got some other things that are coming up like Shemitah in 2028. So positive things for now as well is that knowing that you've possibly got those types of downturns cyclically to come means that, and if those cycles are linking up and coinciding, then that gives you more confidence that we need to see this mania phase of this cycle first before we see all of that play out. So I hope you like that little bit of a nugget of information about cycles, and we'll break them down more in some upcoming longer form videos. with charts to back it up.